But where you could easily argue that there is pushback against Trump and Republicans is in Virginia. And Virginia is one of the more interesting states to talk about as far as voting. It's historically a battleground state. There have also been a lot of eyes on Virginia, of course, because of the Charlottesville protests. And so eyes were on Virginia, what was going to happen in the races for the House of Delegates and the governorship. And wow, it ended up being a huge win for Democrats. And just so you understand how big of a win this was, all 100 seats in the House of Delegates were open. Right, and prior to the election, Republicans had a 66-34 majority over Democrats. But post-election, as of right now, the Democrats have the lead 49-47. They picked up at least 15 seats, and 4 of those remaining seats are just too close to call right now. So as of recording this video, we don't know if the Democrats are going to get the majority. We don't know if all 4 go to the Republicans, so they still hold the majority. I mean, there's also the very real possibility of a 50-50 split. And while as a whole, this is a big statement, there are also all of these smaller statements that we saw in individual races. For example, Danica Roem. She just became the first openly trans person to ever be elected to a state legislature in American history. But the victory seemed even more meaningful to her supporters because of who she was up against. She was running against Republican Bob Marshall. Bob Marshall is an ardent Trump supporter. He called himself the chief homophobe of Virginia. He also wrote Virginia's controversial bathroom ban bill, that being the bill that would ban trans people from using the bathroom of the gender they identify with. And Rome's win was a huge upset. Bob Marshall was a 26-year incumbent, and she did it with more than 10% of the vote, and it seems to be because she had a focus campaign. A campaign that seemed to be not about who she was, but that she wanted to focus on issues like schools, funding, zoning. Meanwhile, Marshall and the GOP were putting out attack ads against Danica. One reading, Danica Roem in his own words. Danica Roem, born male, has made a campaign issue out of transitioning to female. And there was a lot of criticism around that ad for misgendering Danica, for a group that seems to bash identity politics using identity politics. And seemingly with this vote, the majority of people let Bob Marshall know how they felt. But with all of that said, my favorite thing about this story is the aftermath. Reportedly after the election, after Danica Roem had won, she was asked to comment on Bob Marshall. And she said, quote, "I don't attack my constituents. Bob is my constituent now." That is somehow both gracious and extremely damaging. Because that response says both, you know, I'm putting the past and the attacks against me behind me, but that's also because I took your job, Bob. Talk about Democrat Chris Hurst's win over a 6-year Republican incumbent. And if you're wondering why Chris's name might sound familiar, we actually talked about him 2 years ago. You might remember in 2015, a TV host by the name of Allison Parker was killed live on television. She was shot and killed by a disgruntled ex-employee. It came out after that Chris was her boyfriend. And so after that horrible killing, Chris, who was also an anchor at the time, he decided to dedicate himself to figuring out the causes of and fighting gun violence, saying shortly after the tragedy, "Her father wants me to help him do whatever it takes to make sure not one more family has to go through this kind of unspeakable violence. If that means talking about gun reform to reduce gun violence, or if that means talking about increasing access to mental health care and trying to figure out how those who have an illness get the care they need, we will do whatever it takes." And true to his word, gun violence was one of the cores of his campaign. And of course, on top of the huge wins in the House of Delegates, they also managed to pick up the governorship. Lieutenant Governor Ralph Northam beating out Republican Ed Gillespie. And more than just beating him, Northam stunned pollsters when he won by more than 9 points. And like we've seen with the past few elections, many people are trying to tie these elections to Trump's approval ratings. Are people pushing back against Trump? If Trump's saying vote for someone, are they doing? Like I said, many people seeing what happened in Virginia as a pushback against Trump. But following Gillespie's loss, it looked like Trump threw him to the curb. Trump tweeting, "Ed Gillespie worked hard but did not embrace me or what I stand for. Don't forget, Republicans won 4 out of 4 House seats, and with the economy doing record numbers, we will continue to win even bigger than before." Although there's been pushback against this statement with people saying, well, what about those Trump-Gillespie signs? Or the fact that he retweeted your support of him on Twitter, and the candidate that lost was still the candidate you were promoting on your Twitter. When you wrote, "Ralph Northam will allow crime to be rampant in Virginia. He's weak on crime, weak on our great vets, anti-Second Amendment. Ed Gillespie will totally turn around the high crime and poor economic performance of Virginia. MS-13 and crime will be gone. Vote today, ASAP." And then, you know what? Let's say that Gillespie didn't fully embrace Trump. That really shouldn't be a shock. Those connections were very likely to hurt him in Virginia. Statewide, in Virginia, the approval rating for Trump is 39%. In a battleground state that was charged up to vote, that connection was probably more damaging than it was beneficial. I mean, I'm not saying it's like getting a Chris Brown endorsement at a Rihanna concert bad, but it's still bad. I mean, I'm sure there are some people that would love that endorsement, but you gotta know your audience. But with that said, that's where we are right now. But the really interesting thing to me is what happens moving forward. Is this the beginning of the Democrats getting some momentum? Most likely Republicans seeing that they can bleed politically, that's going to ramp them up too. I don't know, but it will be interesting to watch. But that said, that is where I'm going to end today's show. And of